Alright, so let's put on our thinking caps for a minute, and why don't we sort of figure out what it is we can do with this annotation. So far we've seen that it allows us to create a specification for the setters, right? That specification has led us to create graphic user interfaces which constrain user input so that the user input is not going to go out of bounds. Okay. What else can we do with this annotation? Any ideas? We're all very creative people here. Let's think of something. No clue? Suppose the annotation wasn't used to describe how to take the data and represent it to a person. Suppose the annotation described how to retrieve the data. Maybe the data isn't normally stored on a hard drive. Maybe the data is normally stored in a relational database management system. So what you could do is you could provide the SQL, for example, in a string as part of the annotation to help you to store and retrieve the data. So they actually do that in the annotation, and they call that framework Hibernate. So as part of I'll call it Enterprise Java family of products, which you can get, Hibernate actually embraces annotation as a mechanism for saving data, for persisting it out to a relational database management system, for saving and retrieving. So now, you think, oh geez, I'm using annotation for semantics. In fact, you can use annotation for anything you want. So annotation is just, in a sense, a stupid programming language, right? It's one that isn't necessarily going to help you execute very elaborate programs, but you could program your own code in annotation using annotation language and your own annotation definitions. So this becomes an interesting point. If you want to, you can create your own annotation rules. So here's something called the float range. Well, that must have been defined, and sure enough it was. And so for a float range to be correct, it must have all of these fields, and they all have to be defined. So when you decide that you want to add a float, you're going to have to, well, put in all of these values. Now suppose somebody turns around, it's like changing an interface. Suppose you turned around and you said, I changed the float range to include something that isn't here right now. What could it be? I don't know. Maybe it defines the float as being in radians instead of in degrees. Right? So you can put in a boolean in there that says it's radians or degrees, or is radians is true. Right? So if you did that, everybody who implemented this interface would have to be modified. So it would be a lot easier to create a new interface that embraced the float range. This is all in my annotation package under class utils. So if you go to classutils.annotation, you can find all this good stuff. And here are all the, I'll say, definitions of things. So here's a long range, which is a little bit redundant because it looks just like a float range, only it's a difference, and the difference is it returns longs. Let's see now. Got a little tester in here. Let's try and see if we can get this to work. So that, sometimes when people first discover fonts, they decide they want to try every single font. Well, as I was developing my annotation system, I decided I wanted to try every single annotation, and this does that. So this is giving me an array of stuff. Here's the shoe size, the background, which we played around with already. Here's a square root operation with a background rectangle. You know, what's interesting, I think, is after a while, the annotation system can become so elaborate in order to describe graphic user interfaces that eventually you might as well just program it. Especially if you're going to do things like aren't directly related to the semantics of the usage of the variable. Things like, oh, I want the background to be red. Right? That has nothing whatever to do with like the value for this input in here. So at some level that may not make a difference. Then you can create interesting and wonderful customized editors. Here's a date editor. Now if I go roll over from January to December, it's smart enough to know that it needs to change the let's see, if I go from December 31st to January, it's smart enough to know to change both the month and the year. And then you can set a date using sort of a smart date editor. So at some level, one can make a claim that you can take this only so far. And the other problem, of course, is going to be, what if I want to change something that needs a graphic user interface like a rectangle? Well, I can set the rectangle. Here we'll set the rectangle area, select the area, and that's my little rectangle editor. So it'll let you set a rectangle size. The question of whether or not that's flexible enough for you is another matter. You may want to say, geez, I want circles or something else. So there are limits. Let's see if this works. Does this work? Open filters. Here is an airplane. Yep. So it doesn't open. Kind of an interesting idea. A good application, I think, for reflection. Annotation is. Let's see what else we can get out of this little lecture on reflection. Let's see. Oh, right. So here's some interesting stuff. Once you get into spinners, you may want to change the way they're laid out. Remember what I said before about how sometimes if you keep adding features to an annotation, it becomes like a stupid programming language? Well, that's what happens here. Now I determine whether or not I want to lay it out so it's compact or it's not compact, whether the background is red or not, things like this. Other thing you can do, and I got really interested in representing proper formulas. At one point I wanted Greek letters to be everywhere, so my annotation display characters should be able to display symbols that include things like rho and phi and theta and superscripts. I wanted annotation to capture LaTeX. So if I could put LaTeX into my annotation, then when I created a label, it could look like a proper formula. And that, becomes a very exotic and somewhat idiosyncratic thing to want to do. But I was kind of psyched enough to try it. So that's my little discussion about reflection. Aha. So now let's get back to my little Yahoo Finance problem. Here are all these wonderful fields. How many fields are there? Well, I don't really know. Lots and lots of fields. But when I go to the key statistics and I look at all the fields in this row, and then I look at all the fields in that row, and then I find all the fields everywhere, wouldn't it be nice, I thought, if I could devise a way, using reflection, to automatically parse tables in a format where you have the table label and then the value. If I could do that, then I wouldn't have to use a lot of ad hoc parsing with a long dispatch in my HTML editor, which is kind of a pain, because then it'll say, if I find a tag that says, if forward annual dividend rate, then set the forward annual dividend rate. Right? That's sort of weird and wacky and not object-oriented and time-consuming and error-prone and tedious. And it isn't even good learning. So I'm wondering, wouldn't it be nice, first of all, if I could output the Java code that would have all the setters and getters that I need? How would I do that? Suppose I said, well, I'm going to have a way to store the forward annual dividend rate. That could be the name of a variable, right? Forward, I mean, where would you put the forward annual dividend rate, except perhaps in a floating point variable called forward annual dividend rate? Right? I mean, you could call the variable Fred, but that wouldn't make sense. Give it a proper name. So a name that actually means something. So you can extract all of these labels from your tables, and you can generate Java code in a relatively automatic way. Wouldn't that be nice? Or so I thought. That sounds nice. Sounds like, well, it might save you some time, wouldn't it? Maybe? So I set about trying to do just that. And it's in my little finance package under stocks and Yahoo. And we'll see if I can get this to work. So here it says, get the data from the web and clean it. So what he's going to do, he's going to go out to the web, look at the stock statistics, get all of the names from all of the table entries, and create setters and getters for the whole thing without having to write any of the code. Now, you know, in order to do all of that, you might have to be relatively clever about it. I can give it a try, see if it works, and there it is. So now let's see what this has done for us, if anything. He's created the setters and the getters for each of the variables in the statistics for the Yahoo Finance data. So isn't that swell? Because look at what it's done here. It's output all of the code. Although it looks like there's some wacky stuff going on in here at the top. It's not perfect. Some kind of number format exception at runtime is happening. But I dare say that most of this stuff, oh, there's some bugs in there as well. Much of this stuff, some of this stuff, might be of use. So I wonder what would happen if I took all of this code, copied it, and put it into some sort of a Java program. What would we call it? Oh, in this case it's called Yahoo Stats. And it looks like it has just about everything in it. That's kind of what comes out at the end of the day. Automatically generated code. Now, what I liked about this is its, I don't know, elegance and clean, and it just, you know, has one role, and that is to store values. Then I thought, well, okay, now I've got all these wonderful values. What can reflection tell me about these values? So then I said, well, I've got all the values. I've, you know, found them in this HTML. I created a Java program synthesized directly from the HTML and a little parsing magic, and then I proceed to output the Java program, make a great big humongous data structure. Now what? Now I've got to populate the data structure. And remember, last time I did this with an HTML editor, I was busy doing a dispatch until I was blue in the face. I was looking at every tag, and I said, well, if it's the year-end date whatever thingy, then set the year-end date whatever thingy. And if it's the that thingy, then set the that thingy. And we made a giant humongous dispatch out of it. But wait, can't we work smarter? Can't we use reflection? Wouldn't that be better? I don't know. Maybe. If it doesn't work very easily and it's very hard, you might be better off just typing the whole thing in by hand. And so it kind of depends on how good you are with reflection. And the answer to that is barely beginners. Right? This is not the time to give you a very hard reflection homework, I'm thinking. But in the back of your mind, you should think, wow, if I had reflection working for me, I wouldn't be typing all this stuff. I'm reminded of the first time I taught Java Programming 1. And I said, okay, print all the numbers from 1 to 100. I had explained about for loops and I explained about print statements, and sure enough, somebody handed in handwritten notes with all the numbers from 1 to 100. Right? Now, what would have happened if I had said, okay, print all the numbers from 1 to 1,000? Would they have written all the numbers? So you've got to think, geez, what were they thinking when they did that? So here we are, we're doing this with a relatively modest number of fields. And yet we still are dwelling on the idea that we're going to do the whole thing by hand, even though we've heard all about reflection and the way in which it can work its little magic. Right? So let's see what we can do with the Yahoo stats. We'll make a new instance of it, pass that instance into reflectutil, grab all the methods in our little data structure, get the right methods, and get their names, and print out the methods and see what happens. And sure enough, I can get every one of the right methods. I got their visibility, the element they return, the fully qualified class name, the method, its argument, and I also have a shortened version of the name. So it's possible to use these values as you encounter them in the table and then proceed to use reflection based on the value name in order to be able to set the value. Of course, that goes to the basic question of, will you do it that way? I'm thinking probably not, because you're beginners and reflection has a lot of non-deterministic behavior at runtime. Reflection is not type safe at runtime. Right? So if you're coming up with something like a payout ratio, how do you know it's supposed to be a float? How do you know if it's supposed to be a string? How do you know if it's supposed to be a long or an integer? So the types are not well known when you're reading in values from a table. And therein lies the rub. If you don't know the types in advance, it's very difficult for you to interpret them correctly. Unless you sit down and you write the annotation for each one of the setters. And then of course you could do it a different way. You could actually make it so that you know what the argument should be by inspection, by inspecting each one of the elements in the table. That's very labor intensive. Right? Why? Because it's all mixed up. These aren't homogeneous things. Like, here's a percentage. Here's something with a date. Here's something that's not a number. It's not available. These numbers have M next to them, and those numbers have, B's next to them. There's a whole bunch of different numbers in here that look kind of weird and wacky. So going through all of this and doing the parsing, I think that's a good exercise. Very healthy for you. And it'll give you a little insight into what it's like to actually do a real-world data mining operation. I want to say that sounds like a midterm to me. What do you think? So we're basically looking at parsing the Yahoo, I guess they're calling them key statistics. Yep, yeah, these are not just statistics. These are key statistics. And so when we go to get them, it's KS for key statistics.
So would that come in as a string?
Well, the key statistics come in as HTML. And then you have to basically deal with parsing the HTML. And then the question is, how should I do that? Well, I can tell you what I did. I used the HTML editor kit. But that's before I had JSoup available. So now with JSoup, maybe JSoup's better. I don't know. Some people here like JSoup. Right? Who prefers JSoup over the HTML editor kit? Got one only? Nobody else?
I like it, but I've never tried the HTML editor.
Yeah, HTML editor kit. Well, I got a nice example there for you. I frankly think it's not as specifically designed for the kind of screen scraping that JSoup is. So I'm thinking maybe JSoup is better in some sense, but I don't know enough about it to comment intelligently. That's how little I know about JSoup. I've seen it a couple times in use, and that's it. And I haven't seen any books on it. Are there books on JSoup? I don't think so. I mean, I've been looking because I thought it would be good. It would be fun to try a different API for doing the same thing that I've been doing. So I say use whatever you like. Use JSoup, use regular expressions, use HTML editor kit, use something else. What else is there? Is there anything else? That's it. That's all we know about. If there is something else, and I think there might be, because I've done, the search on this, some of the tools that I found were a little long in the tooth. Like from 2002, there's another open source program, not JSoup. I wouldn't recommend it because it's kind of looking abandoned. It was like an Apache product. But maybe it's good. I really don't know. Kind of depends on maybe your taste. So I would write this up. And let's use Blackboard. And how long do we need for this? It's a midterm. It's midterm time, isn't it? Yeah, I think so.
Would you want all the data, or would you want...
Yeah. Everything. So what we'll do is course content, assignments, test, create new test. You know what? Yes, sir.
Are we restricted to using Java?
What do you want to program it in? Fortran?
Well,
You mean like MATLAB?
well, if we wanted to accomplish the same...
You mean like Perl or something?
Maybe.
You want to use Perl?
No, actually, I was thinking like JavaScript.
JavaScript?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, maybe. Yeah, whatever.
Be careful what you wish for. I don't care. Whatever language you want.
That's why I was just curious about if we could use any language.
Any language you want, it's okay with me. Any IDE you want, it's fine. But it should be automated, right? You're not just going to sit down and write it out by paper, like the freshmen do in their first programming class when they're kind of pooping their pants when you tell them to like count to 100. And they say, "Oh, that sounds hard. I'll just write it out." That's just weird. I'm going to call this a homework, but I'm going to give it the name midterm. Oh, look at that. It pops right up. Midterm assignment. That's good. So, here we go. Using a URL for Yahoo Statistics, for example, and what we'll do is we'll paste in the example we've been working with. Write a program to populate a data structure that contains all of the data in the statistics. Okay. For example, here's the example, and I think I think we have it here under Yahoo Summary, Yahoo Statistics. Maybe not. Oh, Yahoo Summary Data, is that it? Not sure. Yeah, this is just a fragment of the Yahoo Statistics. It's not all of them. Here it says Yahoo Stats. Yeah, I think this is the one you want. I will copy this, but just the head. Then what we'll do is paste it in here, and ... Please see the course code. You may use HTML Editor Kit, JSoup, or any appropriate API in any language you like. Now, what are the other languages you guys like?
I like JavaScript.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know JavaScript.
I like it because the key value like hash objects is really convenient as a data structure for finding them, more so than arrays. There is a hash map in Java.
Yeah, there's hash maps in Java.
Well, yeah, but they're not as good.
You don't like them?
Yeah, I actually used them for the last homework assignment, but
Oh.
they were lacking.
Okay. They call them hash tables, you know.
Yeah.
You didn't like them? Okay. I'm looking forward to seeing your solution. Any other interesting and wonderful languages you guys want to try? Snowball? I like Snowball. That's a string-oriented business language, Snowball. They don't use that anymore. That's it, right? No other exotic and wonderful
Ruby.
language? Huh?
Ruby.
Ruby. Yeah, great. You want to try Ruby? I think that's fine. I actually don't know Ruby, so I'll learn something by reading your solution.
I know a little, so
Maybe this is your big chance to learn Ruby. Or to mess up your midterm. It might be good to learn it on something that isn't mission critical. So, what I'd like to do is give you guys enough time to do this. What would be enough time? How about 2 weeks? And then 2 p.m. And let's review before I hit submit, just to make sure there are no outstanding questions. Using a URL for Yahoo Statistics, for example, key statistics, write a program to populate a data structure that contains all the data in the statistics. For example, I should mention the statistical, whoops, what just happened? Stop! It's my trackpad. Statistical data should be stored in primitive data types. Right? So floats go in floats, longs go in longs, doubles go in doubles. Except for, let's call it string data. Which might be something like names or something like that.
How do we handle like the B and percentage sign?
Well, I actually have I have parsers for percentage and you know, Yahoo Money and where are the parsers?
Yeah.
You can check in string utils, for example. I can do that real quick before I hit submit on this. You know, for me to get the Yahoo summary data through this parser, I think I had get a Yahoo double, right? So what's a Yahoo double? If the string contains not a number, then get a formatted Yahoo number. A formatted Yahoo number, right, there's the percentage sign. Here's the not available sign. Here's some parse exceptions. So parsing Yahoo numbers is tricky. It's a little ad hoc. I got it in string utils. Maybe you don't like to use my package, you'll use your own then. But at least you can see what I tried. And if what I tried doesn't work for you, you may need to do your own thing. That's totally fine. Especially if you're going to go off and start programming in Ruby. I think you'll almost certainly be doing your own thing. Oh, I won't be giving you any extra help in Ruby. And it's not because I don't wanna. It's just because I just can't. So yeah, there's kind of an example in here. My little Yahoo summary parser. If I run it, kind of works. Now he says here he got the percentage of the float and he read it out at 0.03. So if I check it, and I go down to Yahoo Finance and I look at the key statistics, and it says here it was something called percentage, find percentage percent. Now he's having a little difficulty finding it. I know there was a percentage of float in there somewheres. Here is short percentage of float. So that says 3%. Here it is percent held by insiders, 0.04. I don't know if I got all of that. It says short percentage of float, 0.03%. Short ratio, 1.8. somewhere in here it should say something like short percentage of float.
How do you get that to actually run? Mine just says it doesn't have a CSV file.
Here it is, short percentage of float. 3% minus 0.03. Oh, 0.03 is 3%. It makes perfect sense, so it did parse it. So then, next question is, how do you make that work? There's like a main in here somewhere, isn't there? Find main. There was a main, and then there was a main 2. I think the main 2 gets everything as a CSV. If you turn main into main 2 and then turn main 2 into main, it'll start to run the Yahoo summary parser. So you should be able to find two mains. One is called main, the other is called main 2, and you got to run the right main. Right now you're probably running main 2, or you're probably running main, but you want to run main 2, so I renamed it to get it to work. I didn't modify it in any meaningful way. I just ran the right main. Does that make any sense? So if you go to Yahoo Summary Parser and it prompts you for CSV file, which it almost certainly will, just make sure that you are not running the wrong main. You're probably running this main down here when you want to be running this main over here. When I first started this program, it didn't work because of that. And what happened was this. So if that's what's happening to you, what you want to do is this. Take the main, convert it to main 2, take main 2, turn it into main. Now when you run it, it should work. And that's giving you kind of a head start, unless you're using Ruby, in which case it does you no good at all. So this is exactly the kind of thing I'd like you to do, only it doesn't do it for every value, right? This does it for a subset of the statistics. There are many statistics that are missing.
What are the statistics that are missing?
Oh, well, you know, what you see here is perhaps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So I got 18 statistics here, right? But if you look at what's missing, you know, let's count them together, okay? So I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Keeps going, right? Keeps going. And then if you go over here on the right, there's a whole bunch more.
Also, you want...
I want all of it.
Do we have to redo the whole thing, or just add to what you have?
You can add to what I have.
Because, I feel like...
You can certainly start with what I have, unless you're programming it in Ruby. Dude, you really want to program it in Ruby. Good. I like hitting my head against the wall because it feels so good when it stops. Yeah, I needed a challenge. It wasn't hard enough.
I think you get a higher grade just because you did it in Ruby.
Yeah, do I get a higher grade? What if I run you an iOS application? And then I charge you $40 a month?
You mean this is going to be like Angry Birds? You're going to make your fortune here?
Yeah,
With
stock units.
I'm thinking that maybe you're onto something here. I mean, if these are the key statistics, imagine what happens if you want to get all the statistics. Right? There must be more. That could be your final. Yes. So, are you guys all questioned out on this? I'm going to hit submit. I haven't hit submit yet.
Oh, can you put more time?
Can you do more time? It's 2 weeks.
I'd say like 4 weeks.
You need. Well, if you're willing to get an incomplete, we can make it due September of next, academic year.
I just said the number of attempts, like in between.
Oh, more attempts.
Yeah.
More attempts. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How many attempts?
Well, it's good. Twice the three. Three? Yeah.
Why do you
Yeah,
submit
just don't
it?
submit it until it works.
Yeah. Well,
Because then I changed my mind about something, and then I was like, oh, I could do this better.
how about two?
I'll take it.
I'm not really gonna improve your grade if you submit it late again, because it's a midterm. It has to be due on time.
I'm not
Uh,
asking for more time. I'm just saying I just want to
As a matter of fact, I was going to limit its display ability, but I think it's probably better to be a little more flexible than that. So it'll still be displayed after the due date, but it'll come in late. So you really don't want to be late with your midterm. And I don't know that I'm going to raise your grade if you're submitting it again after it was due. So don't use that as a way to go in late with the
Oh, no.
yeah.
It's just that, like today, I submitted a code for you. They
I,
found it wasn't the
I,
correct code I wanted, so I submitted another version of it.
I used to have unlimited attempts every time I did a homework, and in my graduate class, they just kept submitting it because I had been increasing the grades every time they submitted it. And so they kind of abused it. I would have 5, 6 attempts, and they just kept saying, well, my grade isn't going up after a while. I started making the grades go down because it was getting annoying. So apparently adding lots of attempts is a source of abuse, and I felt like this is terrible. Barely.
Okay.
What are you going to do with 2? That's my question.
Submit it.
All right, so you got 2. Anything else? We good? Let me just look at this date for a second. I hate to do this to you, but I just want to make sure. When is this thing due? Due the 19th. Today is...
The last batch before spring break.
Yeah, you want this due before spring break. Absolutely.
21st.
Okay, good. I feel comfortable with that. Before spring break is better. Okay? You guys are good? So now for the reading, I'd like you guys to look at chapter 24, which is on reflection. That was today's, lecture, the main lecture. And you guys have already had some experience writing programs that use sockets that read data, because you've had the network time program. But what you haven't done is you haven't done anything with sockets that actually writes data. Right? You can read data, but you can't write data. But in fact, we can do that. And I thought it would be fun for us to have a looky-loo to see just exactly what the programs look like in order for us to be able to do that sort of thing. So the data mining that we've done has been, I will call it, pretty high-level programming. Cancel. Stop that. But what we can do with our network capabilities is we can send data from one place to another. Now here's something you might not have seen every day, and it's called a web server. So what I'd like to do, and I've done this not only here in Java in my own computer on my laptop, but I've also written little web servers for things like Arduinos, because when you have an Arduino, you have a microcontroller that's general purpose that can host what's known as an accessory. called a shield. And the shield sits on top of the Arduino using a bus known as a mezzanine bus, and it can plug in. And one of the shields that you can plug in to the little microcontroller has an Ethernet card. So you can take your little microcontroller and you can put it on the Ethernet. And you can say, okay, so what? Well, so now you can run a little web server on the microcontroller and serve up data or do embedded control and build what's called a networked embedded system. This is something I've done where you put in a servo, you get a web server with a little interface, and you plug in like an angle and the servo turns to that angle. Great fun, right? You can I steer a little laser around in my living room so that I can scan stuff. So what I want to do is, build a little 3D rangefinder. In order to do that, I want active illumination that I can control under the computer. So the interface becomes the network. And all I have to do from the Java side is find a way to grab onto the web server output, and then I can steer the laser around. So it makes a convenient interface. So what you do in order to build your little web server is you have to create an application that's going to run on your computer that will listen for a connection on a specific port. Ports are very much like phone numbers. They're consumed resources. When somebody picks up the phone is in use and it's their phone call, right? And unless they say, okay, it's for you, and hand it over, you don't interrupt them because that's not nice. It's not correct protocol. So with a web server running on a port, other applications that want to start and use that port number get a port in use exception at runtime. So port numbers are consumed resources. And so what happens when a web server runs is you can assign it to an arbitrary port. The common port for a web server is port 80, but you can use any port you like. And if there are already web servers running on your computer, it's very good if you're going to run on a port that's not a standard port. So what I'll do is I'll run my little web server on port 8080. And then what I'll do when the web server starts is I will create what's known as a socket server. And what that will do is it'll listen for connection, a TCP/IP connection, on port 8080. So now I'm ready to receive information. So before we were creating sockets and we were going to go get information, now we're going to be servers of information. And then what I'll do is I'll block my primary thread of execution with a while loop, and the while loop will say s.sssocketserver.accept, and that will stop the primary thread of execution. And now my program just sits and waits. When somebody connects to me, what I will do is I will start a client thread which will deal with that new connection and then go back and listen for my next connection. The number of threads which I can create without slowing down the machine is in the many thousands. Perhaps 5,000 can easily be created within the Java virtual machine without any slowing down. And it's not creating a new task, it's just creating a new thread. It's a very low overhead context switch. To start the client, I make a new instance of a client thread, and then I proceed to invoke it. So the client thread must be runnable, gets passed into the thread argument, the thread constructor, and when I do thread t.start, what I become in the life cycle of the thread is ready to run. Ready to run does not mean running. Ready to run means enabled to be running, so that when the thread scheduler allocates a little resource, like some CPU resource and some memory, then it will schedule me to run, and then I will proceed to start running until the run method returns. The data has been sent back to the client, at which point the thread is now killed. This is part of the life cycle of the thread. It goes back into the heap. It's for another thread to be created. Because threads consume not only the resource of CPU time, they consume a little memory because you're making a new instance. The thread scheduler works very much like a job scheduler. So then here comes the thread client. The client thread implements runnable because if you want to pass something to the constructor of a thread, it has to have a way to run itself, and thread schedulers have to know how to run the jobs. So when you implement runnable, you provide a run method. And now I have some wonderful HTML type strings. This is actually what you would call HTTP type strings. And now I can proceed to do stuff like I'll read from the client. I can write out to the client. And if somebody says get, which is a standard protocol in hypertext transfer protocol to get a file, instead of getting a file, I'll count to 10 right out for the client to see. So I'll be creating dynamic HTML in response to the client's query when they connect to me. And now in order to count to 10 and have the client render it properly, I'll tell it about the response, that he made a proper query. I'll give it the content type. I'll say it's plain text. And then this is all part of what's known as the multipurpose internet mail extension protocol. Plain text / plain can also be text / HTML. It could be text / RTF. You can put in audio. You can put in audio in different file types. You can put out images. You can put out arbitrary binary data and give it a type so that it knows how to decode it. So the MIME data type, multipurpose internet mail extension data type, is really just a string that says this is the kind of data to expect, and it is the process data that you would expect to be decoded by the browser or its plugin. And you can generate that process data dynamically. You could generate JavaScript. The browser can render JavaScript. If you generate Ruby, you'll confuse the browser. You could, in theory, parse the getter and see if it's giving you an argument, in which case you could use the web server you create to get a file. Then serve that file off the root of your disk drive. Or if you have a compact flash card inside of your little Arduino, that might work too. So now I hear you say, gee, Professor Lyon, you've been stalling. Why don't you run the darn thing so we can see it work? I don't know if it works. Ooh, it didn't do anything. That's a good sign. Let's go to a browser. And now what we'll do is we'll go to localhost :8080. Enter. Yep, counts to 10. How about that? Look, I built a web server. What did you learn in school today, Brian? Oh, Ma, I built a web server. And I learned not to go out in my pajamas at 2 in the morning. So, yes, it's... let's see what else we can do. Other good things we can do with our web server. Count to 10. Counting to 10 is good. I like that. How about if we count to 100? That might work. One would hope. And now we're doing server-side Java. How exciting. Oh, look, it counts to 100. So there you have it. Server-side Java in a nutshell. Build your own web server and you're there. Now, here comes the interesting bit. What happens if somebody has a form and they want to post the form data to your web server for processing? Well, the form is using what's known as Common Gateway Interface, or CGI. And what you'll be doing if you start to read that data as it comes in is you'll be writing a CGI type parser. But thankfully, there are frameworks available that do this for you. And one of the most famous of them is the servlet. And the servlet essentially does what I just did here, only it reads in the CGI that comes back from the browser and then proceeds to parse it and gives you a relatively high-level look at the content of the form that's being submitted. What do you think of that? Cool, right? Not so much. No? Really? I thought it was nice. So in theory, what kind of HTML can we generate over here? Suppose I said instead of plain text, we're going to output HTML. You guys know any HTML? Yeah? So I'll just say HTML and then inside of the HTML end quote end paren sem, what we'll do is we'll put in the header. Oh, I know. How about this? An unordered list. I'm doing this kind of off the top of my head here. And then what we'll do is end the unordered list. And then what we'll do is we'll put in each one of these counts as a list item. Paste. And then I guess we can do it this way. li end paren and then quote plus quote. I hope I'm not blowing anybody away with my off-the-cuff HTML authorship here. li. And now this is saying unexpected token because I missed a parenthesis somewhere. Oh, I see. This has got to go with a plus sign. There you go. So just not to put too fine a point in it or on it, there's another wacky thing going on here. What's going on here? This needs to be an end parenthesis and a semicolon. Okay. Good. So it starts off by saying I'm going to supply you with HTML. Then he starts with a start HTML tag. Then he says I'm going to give you an unordered list. And then he says here's a list item. And then he ends the unordered list. Oh, he's ending the unordered list too frequently here. He should do this whole thing first as part of the for loop. And then this should be part of the print statement down in here. pw.println. You know, in the process of explaining this, I see the errors of my way, right? Because the list items should all go one after another, and then at the end of the day, we should stop the unordered list, and then stop the entire HTML. And I think maybe you're ready for this. Well, that was exciting. View page source. Oh, there's no page source here. Really? I was convinced I had this right. It looks like it's outputting some nice getter stuff, so it's seeing my query. Well, I must have some sort of an error in my HTML. What if I said this was plain? I might have the wrong content type. Well, funny thing is I don't see any page source. Seems like it should have output the page source to me. Anybody see the error of my ways here? Well, I'll tell you, there's a tricky way that you can go back. You can show the history, and you can go 6 minutes ago, and then you can roll back to 6 minutes ago. Revert. And then it undid everything. Isn't that cool? So now it should be back to where it was before I screwed it up. And with any luck, this will work. Oh, it works. So to recap, there's a little bit of built-in version control in IntelliJ, and that version control can be had. That'll save you, especially when you mess things up. Just show the history, click on where you want to go back to, and use rollback. And unless you set up a version control system that IntelliJ rendezvous with, you'll have to do it since you started IntelliJ. It'll work with the local history. If you decide to use something like source code control system or Git, then it'll work with the Git server. I think that's probably enough for today. Why didn't the HTML work? Yeah, I don't know. That should have worked. What happens if I just go in here and put in a little HTML for good time? And say something like, I don't know. Here, make it bold or something. B plus, I didn't even put the HTML moniker in. Don't have to escape a /, do I? Shouldn't do. I mean, nothing came out. That was the other thing. Oh, yeah, he's not interpreting it as HTML. He's interpreting it as plain text. If I throw the HTML in there now, oops, end quote, end paren sem. Oops, wait. Okay, now refresh. See, by outputting HTML, you would expect this to show me the page source. Is it possible this would look differently in a different browser? I'm just wondering if I made some sort of basic fundamental error here.
I don't think Chrome supports it.
No. I'm outputting HTML. Chrome doesn't know. Firefox. I don't have any other browsers. Oh yeah, I can try that. How about that? Oh, I have an end tag that's being printed. Oh. This is bad. Why is my end tag being printed so much? Oh, it's inside the parentheses. Right. That's bad. Don't do that. No wonder. Sure, it ended the HTML. This is why people use Java server pages and they don't try and generate HTML in this way. Nope, didn't help. Got a little too hacky for me. Let's see, refresh. Isn't it funny how it didn't render the first HTML tag? I wonder if it needs a character turn. It shouldn't do, though.
What happens if you change your text type? Will that make it better?
Yeah, there should be a MIME type for text/HTML. I'm going to try putting in a print line in here just for a good time. It mattered. It needed the print line after the first content type declaration. Without it, it didn't recognize it. That was easy. I can't believe it was just a character turn. That's all he needed. So now you've got a web server and it's outputting HTML. Cool, right? Yeah, I've got a binary web server as well as a web server that outputs like files, all these other things. It's kind of fun. Build your own web server. Make a networked embedded system. You know, if you think about it, most modern laser printers have a built-in web server, especially if they're networked. Like this one over here, it has its own little web server, so when you get to the laser printer, you can administer the laser printer over the net directly with a browser. It'll even password protect itself so that people don't casually alter the printer. So from that point of view, there's a lot of value added when you have a networked embedded system. So that's what I got for today. Stay warm, drive safe.